A fortune hinges on a single mistranslated word over dessert. Crystal glasses clink under low amber lights, masking a multi-million-dollar corporate trap. One exhausted waiter carrying a tray of dirty plates hears the deception. He has two choices: keep walking or risk everything to warn a ruthless stranger. $72. Dean felt the receipt paper crumple in his apron pocket, the cheap thermal paper damp with condensation from a dozen water pitchers. $72 was the exact cost of Maya's generic brand inhaler out of pocket. It was also, coincidentally, the exact price of the Wagyu carpaccio appetizer, currently sitting on the tray balanced precariously on his left fingertips. The dining room of Osteria di Lusso smelled intensely of roasted garlic, white truffle oil, and the faint ozone sterility of expensive air purifiers. It was a Tuesday night. The ambient noise was a low, moneyed hum, the sound of deals being made, affairs being discreetly managed, and fortunes shifting hands over plates of pasta that cost more than a tank of gas. A dull ache radiated from the arch of Dean's right foot, shooting up his calf and settling deep in his lower back. His cheap polyester blend uniform pants chafed at the thighs. He had been on his feet for 9 hours. His shift was supposed to end at 10, but the private party at Table 7 had decided to linger. Table 7 was currently occupied by 3 people, but it possessed the gravity of a black hole, warping the entire restaurant service around it. At the head of the table sat Vivian Hayes. Dean knew her name because the maitre d' had practically hyperventilated during the pre-shift briefing. CEO of Hayes Logistics, a woman who had inherited a failing freight empire and ruthlessly dragged it back into the black. Up close, she didn't look like the tyrant the business magazines painted her as. She just looked incredibly, bone-deep tired. She wore a charcoal suit that fit like armor, the fabric absorbing the dim restaurant lighting. Her posture was rigidly perfect, but Dean noticed the subtle, repetitive motion of her left thumb rubbing the joint of her index finger. There was a faint smudge of ink on her knuckle. She drank her sparkling water without ice, taking slow, measured sips as if rationing her energy. Across from her sat Valerio Costa. He was a Milanese shipping magnate, a man built like a luxury refrigerator. Broad, imposing, encased in a bespoke navy suit that strained slightly at the shoulders. He smelled heavily of bergamot and expensive cigar smoke, a scent that lingered in the air long after he walked past. Between them sat the translator, Simon. Simon was a slight man with thinning hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He wore a gray suit that was a shade too light for the evening atmosphere. His hands were soft, resting on a leather portfolio, and he spoke with the polished, frictionless cadence of a man who made a living smoothing over rough edges. Dean approached the table, his movements practiced and invisible. That was the golden rule of Osteria di Lusso. Be a ghost who serves wine. Wagyu carpaccio, garnished with shaved white truffle and capers, Dean murmured, sliding the chilled porcelain plate onto the heavy linen tablecloth with a soft, muted click. Vivian didn't look up. Her eyes were fixed on Valerio. She offered a tight, professional smile. Tell Mr. Costa that I appreciate his flexibility on the maritime routes. However, the East Coast ports are non-negotiable. My infrastructure there is the core of this merger. Simon nodded, turning to Valerio. He began to speak in rapid, fluid Italian. Dean stepped back, adjusting the heavy silver water pitcher in his hand. He poured a splash of San Pellegrino into Vivian's glass. And as he did, he listened. Dean wasn't just a waiter. 6 years ago, before the custody battle, before the bankruptcy, before Maya's medical bills started piling up, he had been married to a woman from Palermo. They had lived in Sicily for 4 years. He had learned Italian not in a classroom, but in loud, chaotic kitchens, arguing with contractors and haggling in street markets. He didn't just know textbook Italian. He knew the slang. He knew the regional dialects. He knew the subtle, cutting insults native speakers used when they thought foreigners weren't listening. Simon's Italian was flawless. But what he said to Valerio wasn't what Vivian had asked him to say. "She is desperate," Simon said to Valerio in Italian, his tone dripping with condescension. "She is trying to hold on to the East Coast ports, but she doesn't have the capital. Push her on it. She will fold." Dean's hand froze for a fraction of a second. A single drop of condensation fell from the pitcher, landing on the tablecloth and blooming into a dark, wet circle. Valerio's eyes gleamed. He leaned back in his chair, picking up his fork. He spoke around a mouthful of carpaccio, his accent thick and aggressively northern. "Bene, lasciala sanguinare. Le daremo il 20% in meno di quanto concordato. Se non accetta, andiamo dai cinesi." "Good. Let her bleed. We will give her 20% less than agreed. If she doesn't accept, we go to the Chinese." Simon turned back to Vivian. His polite plastic smile returned instantly. "Mr. Costa says he completely understands your position on the East Coast ports," Simon told her in perfect, unaccented English. "He is willing to consider